Wonderful to see all of you here. We're going to get started as we delve into the story of Jonah.
Thank you, Rabbi. So, for the story of Jonah today, we're going to do it a little bit differently, um, both with some creative reading of the Haftarah, as well as a wonderful addition and personal reflection and explanation of the Haftarah, and a couple of songs that and some ways to kind of hopefully direct our attention and direct our minds a little bit. So we begin now with the blessing before the Haftarah as we begin to delve into the story of Jonah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nvi'im tovim ורצה ודבריהם הנאמרים באמת. ברוך אתה אדוני הבוחר בתורה ובמשה עבדו ובישראל עמו ובנביאי האמת והצדק. And the word of Adonai came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Get up, go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim against it, for their evil deeds have risen up before me. But Jonah got up to flee to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai, and he went down to Jaffa and found there a ship heading for Tarshish, and he paid its fare and went down into it to head with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of Adonai. But Adonai hurled a great wind upon the sea, a storm at the sea, so great that the ship was in danger of being shattered to pieces. And the sailors were frightened, cried out, each to his own God, and flung the ship's cargo into the sea to lighten their load. But Jonah had gone down into the hold, the lower deck of the vessel, and he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. And the captain approached him and said to him, "What are you doing? Sound asleep? Get up, call to your God. Perhaps the God will be kind to us and we will not perish." So as we learn here, there's a lot of fear involved as well in the story of Jonah. A lot of fear, not only Jonah's fear of allowing these people of Nineveh to repent and allowing them to once again not be destroyed by God, even though he knows how disastrous a people they are and how horrible they are. And so he runs away. And then on the ship, he faces fear yet again, the fear of the storm. Not his own personal fear, but the fear that is being felt by all of those people who are on the ship with him. And what does he say to them? He says to them, throw me overboard. Throw me overboard and all of this will stop. My God will stop punishing you. And it is through that fear that we start to understand a little bit more about what this story, I think, is trying to teach us. The story is trying to teach us that we can't be held back by our fear in some ways. That even when we are faced with doing the right thing, if we are fearful about doing that right thing and therefore run away from it, we are not embracing the good. We are not embracing the right choices that we make. So I share with you this interpretation now. This interpretation by my dear friend Alana Arian of these words by Reb Nachman of Bratslav, who said, Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar me'od. And while I share these words with you, while I share this song with you, I'd like for you to consider a time when you perhaps misjudged a person or a situation, only to realize when you overcame your fear that there was a great reward ahead of you. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol ha'olam kulo. Other side. The most important thing is on the other side. The most important thing is on the other side of fear. Kol ha'olam kulo. Kol ha'olam kulo. Gesher tzar. Gesher tzar. If only Jonah had realized that the most important thing was on the other side of his fear. If only he had realized how he was restricting himself and restricting what God's will was and the goodness that could come out of these people if given the opportunity. But Jonah couldn't see that so clearly at the beginning of the story. It takes a few chapters for that to happen. It takes a little incident with a fish. It takes a moment of opening his heart to God and speaking with God. And this season, I've had the opportunity to read a lot of wonderful things that have come out, and one of them came out from the famed actress Mayan Bialik. Mayan Bialik, a wonderful actress, and also a doctor of neuroscience, in case you didn't realize that. But Mayan Bialik wrote a beautiful piece about her relationship with Yom Kippur, and specifically her relationship with this story of Jonah. And And I wanted to invite our friend, whoops, didn't want to go there yet. I wanted to invite our friend and a woman who has done so much for the temple over this past time, dealing with security of Temple Bethel and being a member of our board of directors, to share these words from Mayan Bialik. So I'd like to invite Andrea Lawrence to please share these beautiful words from Mayan Bialik and her reflection, therefore, of her view of the story of Jonah.
Jonah is called upon by God to announce the impending destruction of Nineveh if the people don't repent of their generally evil ways. Jonah doesn't want the job, so he runs away and he gets on a boat with some sailors. God follows him and makes a scary storm. The sailors realize this guy's God is mighty, and Jonah says the only way they can be saved is to throw him overboard. So they do, and he's ready to die. But a big fish, not a whale for those of you who are following closely, swallows him, and from the belly of the big fish, Jonah says to God, "Okay, I'll do it. I'm sorry." So the fish spits him up and he tells everyone in Nineveh to repent. And so they do. When God decides that it's sufficient grounds not to punish them, Jonah is so upset that he schlepped all that way for nothing, and at how freely God doles out forgiveness, that he wants to die. So that's the whole story, right? Not entirely. Jonah finds a place to sit in the east of Nineveh. It's a super hot out, and God sends a plant to sprout, and Jonah's thrilled. He's chilling under the plant, and then God sends a worm that eats the plant, and it dies. And Jonah is again so aggrieved that he wants to die. God says, "You cared so deeply about the plant existing, and you didn't even make it. How do you think I feel when I might have to destroy a whole city of people I created?" I cry every time I hear this, because whether or not you believe in God, or whether you feel, or whether you like synagogue or hate it, this is real. Running from destiny is real. Feeling you can't do something because you know how it will turn out, no matter what you do, is real. Other people suffering because of you is real. Getting a second chance is real. And so is being a brat. And ultimately, the realness of our existence is that worms eat plants and they die, and we get mad. And sometimes we get mad at God too. Friends of mine visited Japan last year and brought me back a juniper bonsai seeds. My favorite thing is a bonsai tree. I had to refrigerate the seeds to stimulate winter. Then I had to wait 3 months. Then I had to put them in hot water to stimulate spring. Then I had to plant them and I had to wait.
Andrea, you hit your mute button
Yeah,
accidentally.
sorry about that.
Right after planting them and having to wait. That's where
Okay,
we
I
heard the
waited
last
and
thing.
waited, nothing happened, and I was about to throw the whole thing out when I saw two sprouts. I cried. I watched them so carefully. I sprinkled them with water. I rotated them toward the sun, and they looked strong. And then they fell over a few days apart, flat on their faces, dead. Then a third one sprouted 4 days later. I added some soil. I watched it so carefully. I sprinkled the water and rotated it to the sun. It looked stronger than the other two. This is it, my soul rejoiced. The stem looked stronger and thicker than that of the other two. This was happening. I was going to grow a bonsai. And then one day, my sweetest cat, who is the most kitten-like of all my cats, did something she wanted to do very badly. She ate it. She bit off the top. I cried again. She killed it. That was the last sprout. There will be no more. My frustration was enormous. I wanted to be mad at her, but that wasn't right. And I know better than to be mad at an animal for being just an animal. And then I thought of Jonah, and I was reminded of my smallness. and my powerlessness. And when I think of my tears of joy over the bonsai sprouts, I feel ashamed. My face feels hot and my stomach churns. How foolish I was to think I could do this. I can't do this. And the lesson of Yom Kippur came to me again. My religious tradition reminds me of the smallness and my powerlessness. And my tradition also has ways for me to try again, to not give into despair or my weakness and my insecurities. And so on Yom Kippur, I wear white and I refrain from eating. I'm like an angel. And tradition teaches me that every blade of grass has its angel that bows over it and whispers, grow, grow. On Yom Kippur, I remember that I have the capacity to be patient and forgiving. I can be slow in anger and quick to forgive. I can be both angel and the blade of grass. And on my best days, and sometimes even on my worst, I can be more than a blade of grass. I can be the bonsai who survives and thrives.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing those words. So Jonah has faced so much in his life. And I think Mayan Bialik really encapsulated it so beautifully that here is this man who, first of all, deals with his own fear, then deals also with judging others and therefore being judged himself. And we can say that he was judged by God, as the story teaches, or we could say that when we are judgmental of others, sometimes we end up judging ourselves. That inner voice within us ends up telling us that this is just not the right thing. And we've all been there. We have all been Jonahs in our lives. We have all judged others because of how they looked, because of how they were dressed, because of any number of reasons. And we have decided not to bless them for that reason. We have decided to move to the other side of the street or run away or go somewhere else because somebody moved into our neighborhood that we didn't like, or came to our school or our class, or whatever the case may be. But in the end, what Jonah learns from God is that we have to nurture every soul. We have to nurture every single one and give every person and every soul in this world a chance to return, a chance to ask for forgiveness, a chance to change their ways. And so as I share with you this next song, which is more of a meditation, as we conclude our Jonah study and prepare to conclude our Jonah study, which afterward we will share the blessing after the Haftarah, I'd like for you to meditate or think about who or what have you nurtured in your life, or who or what has nurtured you in your life. Because just as Mayan Bialik spoke about that bonsai tree, and just as Mayan spoke about being the angel or being the blade of grass, each one of us has the opportunity at different times in our lives to be the angel. And each one of us has been that blade of grass at different times in our lives. And so as we offer this blessing and this prayer and this meditation, I hope that you will take it to heart and you will understand that as we enter into this new world, and this new year is what I meant to say, as we enter into this new year, that we need to enter in with different eyes. We need to look upon our neighbors in a different way. And we need to bless each and every one of God's creations. May I be safe. May I be free. May I find space to just be. Ken yehi ratzon. May I find my way back home. Ken yehi ratzon. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May I find my way back home. So now I ask you to call to mind someone who has been good to you, someone who has blessed you, someone who has nurtured you. And offer them this blessing. May you be saved. May you be free. May you find space to just be. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May I find my way back home. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May you find your way back home. Now I ask you to call to mind someone who is difficult for you, someone who is like Nineveh to Job, someone who you have a hard time blessing and accepting. And instead of being Jonah, bless them with these words. May you be saved. May you be free. May you find space to just be. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May you find your way back home. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May you find your way back home. So now we do something easier, and we call to mind all that is good in this community. Everyone that blesses us, everyone that we have nurtured or has nurtured us, this blessed community where we find strength, where we find courage, where we might even find our voices to bless ourselves and each other. May we be saved. May we be free. May we find space to just be. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May we find our way back home. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May we find our way back home. And I pray that it doesn't take a big fish to swallow us up and to spit us out, to have us find our way back home. And I know that as I see all of your beautiful faces here, as I see all of us coming together to learn and to grow and to welcome this new year and to welcome the newness of this year, I know that we will not be Jonahs, but we will be ones who bless those, even if we're not sure how to, even if we're not sure how we feel about them, but because we know that they are like we, B'Tselem Elohim, created in the image of God. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום הזיכרון הזה, שנתת לנו, אדוני אלוהינו, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל, אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך. יתברך שמך בפי כל חי, תמיד לעולם ועד. ודברך אמת וקיים לעד. ברוך אתה, אדוני, מלך מוחל וסולח לעוונותינו ולעוונות עמו בית ישראל, ומעביר אשמותינו בכל שנה ושנה. מלך על כל הארץ, מקדש ישראל ויום הכיפורים.
Thank you, Cantor, for that beautiful presentation on the book of Jonah. And what's so beautiful, I think, about studying any of these books is that there are so many different interpretations that we can have of them. And so whether we view Jonah as someone who was afraid to act or someone who decided not to act because of a different philosophy, we can look at it differently from one another. And I think part of the reason, in fact, I know our sages teach that part of the reason we all come together to study is so that we can have the opportunity to learn from one another, to gain one another's perspectives. Now, we just heard a lot about Jonah, and Jonah, of course, had the sacred calling. But right now, I want to take us in a different direction to a few other people who had a sacred calling. And in particular, what we're going to be talking about is there are times, as we know, when a leader needs to stand up and be a leader, and yet the people around them might not agree with what it is that they feel very strongly about. And so I titled this, The Art of Dissent. And of course, it is partially inspired by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Zifrana Livracha, and the work that she did with her life and her career. I'm going to share my screen so that we can look at a few texts today, starting with a quote by RBG. Dissent, she said, speaks to a future age. It's not simply to say, my colleagues are wrong and I would do it this way. But the greatest dissents do become court opinions, and gradually over time their views become the dominant view. So that is the dissenter's hope, that they are writing not for today, but for tomorrow. Now, here Ruth Bader Ginsburg is talking about just the importance of standing up for what we believe in. Jonah stood up for what he believed in. Was he right? Was he wrong? Who knows, right? I mean, I think I made a statement earlier today that seems to indicate that he was pretty wrong, but who am I to make the ultimate decision? Here, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg made judgments on things that other people on the court didn't necessarily agree with. But what was so interesting about her perspective is that it was not just really short-term, okay, this is the decision, I'm in the minority. Rather, it came from a perspective of a long time. And okay, what's not accepted today might be what's accepted tomorrow. So why am I bringing this in? Because a lot of these ideas that Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg taught come straight from our texts. And the first evidence of that is right here in Mishnah Eduyot. This is around the first, second century that this is put together, just to give you an idea of time that we're talking about here. So it begins, and why do they, I'll talk about it after if this makes no sense. It's Mishnah, it's not supposed to make sense on first read. Don't worry about it, I promise we'll talk through it. But it says, and why do they record the opinion of a single person among the many when the halachah must be according to the opinion of the many? So basically what this is talking about is majority versus minority opinions. let's say a whole group of rabbis are coming together and they're deciding on something. Well, the Mishnah and the Talmud, they have always recorded minority as well as majority opinions. And what's going on in the Mishnah here is they're trying to talk about why. What is the reason that we record the things that the rabbis decided aren't the right ones? Why do we keep that in a written form that then is studied for centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries to follow? This is what they are debating about. So it says, if a court prefers the opinion of a single person, it may depend on him, for no court may set aside the decision of another court unless it is greater than it in wisdom and in number. If it was greater than it in wisdom, but not in number but not in wisdom, it might not set aside a decision unless it is greater than it in wisdom and in number. Okay, so we have a little repetition going on here, right? But what they're saying is, yes, we need to hold on to these minority opinions in all cases. We need to make sure that every single voice is heard. Because maybe, just maybe, we have something to learn even from the people with whom we disagree the most. Maybe our perspective is based on the here and now, and maybe there's something in the future that will give us new insight, and this earlier opinion might enlighten us. In the next little section of Mishnah, where it basically continues from the one above, Rabbi Judah offers a minority opinion based on, it's very meta, it's a minority opinion of why we have minority opinions, okay? So Rabbi Judah says, if so, why do they record the opinion of a single person among the many to set it aside? So that if a man shall say, thus I have received the tradition, it may be said to him, according to the refuted opinion of that individual, did you hear it? What does that mean? Well, the first one is saying, we record the minority opinion because maybe one day this opinion will become the majority. Maybe we have something to learn from it, and in the future we'll come to realize, hey, we were wrong. And really, we should have listened to this guy hundreds of years ago. And Mishnah Ediyot 1:6 says, the reason that we record the minority opinion is so that if this opinion comes up again in the future, we say, nah, we already refuted that. We don't need to listen to that opinion because we've heard it and it didn't make sense then. It was thrown out, and so therefore, why do we have it today? Interesting, this kind of meta conversation that's going on here. So I want to open this up. If anyone wants to respond to anything, feel free to unmute and jump in. This doesn't need to be a one direction thing. Part of the reason we're doing it live is so that we can have conversations with one another. So you can certainly feel free to jump in, but I'm going to continue with the next text. Which comes from the Talmud. This is 4th, 5th, 6th century, depending on what scholar you're listening to, that it was redacted. The text was coming to fruition all throughout this time. So it was incumbent upon Zedekiah to discern between actual prophecies and false prophecies. So what's going on here? Okay, so basically in this text, they're talking about how do we determine if someone is a false prophet or a true prophet. How do we tell the difference between the two? And essentially what they're going to say, I'm not going to read through this whole thing, but essentially what they're going to say is, if a prophet is given a prophecy from God, and every single prophet who hears it, every prophet says the exact same thing and the exact same language, that's how you tell that the prophecy is false. So it's saying even if the prophecy comes from God, unless a prophet can internalize it, unless it is something that people can make sense of in our everyday life, it is false because it doesn't have a relevance today. You can't just have one voice, it's teaching. You need to have multiple voices. And wherever there's only one voice and there's no difference, you know that something is wrong. As you look, I included one of my favorite Oscar Wilde quotes here. When people agree with me, I always feel that I must be wrong. And I just think that that is such a great quote because basically it's pushing us to have conversations with and to really take in the views of other perspectives as well. Indeed, we look at the next text as well, Talmud Bavli says, one who studies Torah from only one teacher will never see a sign of blessing, will never achieve great success. So it's very similar to what I said earlier, right? That if all of us are studying Torah individually, then we'll only see a small little piece of it, and it won't nearly have as much meaning as it would have otherwise. Any comments or thoughts or anything that anyone wants to jump in with?
That's why we always study Torah with at least one partner, ideally even more.
Exactly. We need to come together in community as a group because we have so much that we need to learn from one another.
A lot easier to measure numbers than it is to measure wisdom.
It's hard to hear you, Ken. Can you say that again?
It's much harder to measure wisdom than it is to measure numbers.
It is harder to measure wisdom than it is numbers, right? In the earlier text where it's saying they need to have greater wisdom and greater numbers, well, it's kind of arrogant to say, I have greater wisdom, so your opinion doesn't matter.
Well, in that point, right, wisdom is really what does the majority agree is the greatest wisdom, right? It's a matter of perception and norms.
And perceptions can change over time, right? Imagine how people viewed the world a few hundred years ago compared to how we view it today. How people view the world in South Korea as opposed to here, or North Korea, or it's just, it very much is a matter of the perspective that we bring to it.
It's also a matter of how you were brought up and what your life experiences have led you to. That you may have a point of view that are entirely different from anybody else's, but equally valid. If you're quoting your own life, who can say, "Oh no, you didn't do that"?
Exactly. We all come with those different things. There was one time that my kids overheard someone calling someone else weird. And I taught my kids, you know what? That is the greatest compliment that you can get because it means that you are an individual with your own mind willing to do your own thing. And what if we looked at it that way? What if we wanted to uplift every single person for their wonderful weirdness and their wonderful differences of opinion? It's a great thing to be able to celebrate, I think. And I'm looking at the chat a little bit as well. Thank you, Ken, for speaking up. And Bonnie saying that you see that it's important to study with more than one Torah teacher as well, and you can memorize on your own, but study requires a partner. Exactly. There's so much that if we're working on our own, it might take us a long time to be able to see things from other perspectives. We can gain so much from just being in chavruta, being in a sacred partnership with one another.
I think the challenge is also to choose to study with people who have different points of view.
That is a really good point because how often do we surround ourselves with people who look at the world just like us? And we need that, and it's good for us to have people who can affirm us. But the opportunity to sit around the table from people with totally different backgrounds and totally different perspectives, we don't have enough of that, do we? I'm going to bring us back to our text here with a quote from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg that I think actually speaks to some of what we're talking about. She said, the court's main trust is to repair fractures in federal law. Because the court grants review dominantly when other jurists have divided on the meaning of a statutory or constitutional prescription, the questions we take up are rarely easy. They seldom have indubitably right answers. Yet, by reasoning together at our conferences and with more depth and precision, through circulation of and responses to draft opinions, we ultimately agree far more often than we divide sharply. And isn't that interesting? So often on the surface, When we hear things, we can just turn off to them, have a knee-jerk reaction of, nope, I don't want anything to do with that because it's affiliated with this or whatever. But when we delve into what it actually is talking about, we say, hey, well, wait a second, that's not so different from my perspective after all. So she continues, when a justice is of the firm view that the majority got it wrong, she is free to say so in dissent. I take advantage of that prerogative when I think it's important, as do my colleagues. Despite our strong disagreements on cardinal issues, think, for example, of controls of political campaign spending, affirmative action, access to abortion, we genuinely respect one another. Even enjoy one another's company. Collegiality is crucial to the success of our mission. We cannot do the job of the Constitution assigns to us if we didn't. To use one of Justice, that should say Anthony Scalia's favorite expressions, get over it. Now, we know, one second here. Okay, I'm actually going to go down just a little bit more. I forgot that I put that Sanhedrin code in there. To a discussion about two main houses of study you might know a little bit about. One is Shammai and one is the house of Hillow. And Hillel and Shammai, they disagreed on almost everything. If Hillel says, okay, on Hanukkah, you light one candle the first night and 8 candles in the last night, Shammai says, nope, you light 8 candles on the first night and you light 1 candle on the last night. All sorts of ritual things. Generally, they disagree about all of them. So, for 3 years, the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai argues. One said, the Halachah is like us. The other said, the Halachah is like us. A heavenly voice spoke, these and these are the words of the living God. The Halachah is like the house of Hillow. Okay, so let's backtrack before I go a little bit further here. Basically, Hillel is saying, I'm right. Shammai is saying, no, I'm right. And God is saying, you're both right. Now, of course, it's very difficult to have two conflicting sides being right at the same time. But that's what God is saying here. So what do you think that means? What is that all about? I'm going to stop the share so we can look at one another. Then we'll get back to the rest of this text. Elu ve'elu.
Rabbi, I think just because you have a difference of opinion doesn't mean one of the opinions is right and one is wrong. Kind of goes back to the Judge Scalia, just get over it. We can all be right and agree to disagree with our differences.
There was a book that came out a few years ago that's called You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right. That's so often we can look at the world in terms of black and white, but that's just not how the world works.
Yeah, I really agree with what Michelle said. That's why the word is opinion, right? So there's a rainbow of perspectives. That's not meant in a political sense, but there's a spectrum. I'm an engineer, so I could put it that way. There's a wide range of views. That doesn't mean 3 or 10 different views. There's only one that's right. Just each of us, as you said earlier, come from our own perspective, and Catherine said, from what we've lived in life.
Thank you. And I love how you bring in that rainbow metaphor, because in my sermon this morning, I talked a little bit about a commentary by Rabbi Shmuley Yanklowitz. And in it, he actually says that Jonah sees the world through black and white, but God sees the world through a rainbow. And perhaps right here, all of these teachings are talking to that perspective as well, of having a rainbow of nuance in the ways in which we look at the world, and how easy it can be to get ourselves stuck in black and white, because things are presented that way so much of the time, but that's not actually the reality.
So Shammai was focused on God's sense of justice and kind of based his decisions on that, whereas Hillel was focused on God's sense of mercy and based his decisions on that. And I think the idea was there's a place for both, and both are aspects of God.
Beautiful. That's true. I didn't get into the specifics of it, but that is exactly right. There's Din and there's Chesed. There's judgment and there's loving kindness or compassion. And there does need to be a balance. There is a time and place for them, and there are times where they need to overlap. Thank you for adding that.
And that what is right for us today may not be right for us tomorrow, as RBG said. And beyond that, that there really is no right and wrong, because our perspective is so incredibly limited. Only God knows, true right and wrong. So all we can kind of do is step back and get silence to hope that we, actually hear that righteous word.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to bring us back to the rest of this text just so we can see how it ends here. But thank you so much for all of your input. That's beautiful. Sorry, my daughter's getting calls on my phone. So it concludes, it says, yes, these and these are both words of the living God. And then the question was raised, since the heavenly voice declared both these and these are the words of the living God, why is the halachah established to follow the opinion of Hillow? So yes, they're both correct, but Hillel's perspective is very often considered to be the majority opinion, and Shammai is often considered the minority opinion. That's not always true, but it's true more times than it's not. And so the Talmud says the reason that Hillel is picked is because the students of Hillel were kind and gracious. They taught their own ideas as well as the ideas from the students of Shammai. Not only for this reason, but they went so far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. There was an article that I was reading about Ruth Bader Ginsburg where they were talking about how she would always present the positive side of the other perspective before she went into her own. Very often, if we look at any message board, if we look at the news, everything is the other side, whatever the other side is. It could be defined in lots of different ways, but the other side is completely wrong, is immoral, is terrible, is add whatever adjectives you want there, right? And this is the only right way. But that's not how Justice Ginsburg went about it, and that's not how Hillel went about it. They said, here's this opinion. It has merit. These are the reasons why it has merit. But ultimately, this is the conclusion that I myself come to. And there's a lot of respect in that. So that's a lot of the power, I think, of this relationship between Hillel and Shammai. And they also talked a lot about the positive relationships that took place between the two. So this text here from Yevamot talks about how Beit Shammai didn't abstain from marrying women from the houses of Beit Hillel or vice versa. Very often, if you have two sides that are so different from one another, okay, let's marry our own. We only want to associate with our own, but that's not what happened here. What happened was they wanted to teach that the importance of showing love and friendship toward one another, even people with whom we disagree, in order to uphold the statement of you have love, truth, and peace. What if we were able to do that more in this country? I think it would be a really, really wonderful thing, and it certainly is one of my prayers. But of course, even these best relationships, like the relationship between Hillel and Shammai, has rocky moments. And that's written here in these two texts, one from Talmud Yerushalmi and one from Talmud Bavli. Talmud Bavli was from Babylon, and the Jewish community in Babylon after Jews were exiled from Israel, and Yerushalmi was from Palestine. So really there are these two different bodies of wisdom. So Beit Shammai thrust a sword into a study house and declared, whoever wants to enter may enter, but no one may leave. On that day, Hillel sat in submission before Shammai like one of the students, and it was as wretched for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made. So there was a moment in which Shammai began to attack the people from Hillow. They forgot the sacred connection, and the relationship started to dismantle. Talmud Yerushalmi teaches that was a day as wretched for Israel as the day on which the golden calf was made, just like in Talmud Bavli. It was taught in the name of Rabbi Yeshua Onia. The students of the school of Shammai stood below them and began to slaughter the students of the school of Hillow. It is taught 6 of them ascended, and the others stood over them with swords and lances. And so we see this complete coming apart of these two groups. Ultimately, Hillel and Shammai, after a period of time, would be able to come back together, and that's a story in its own right. But I think that even when we're looking at Hillel and Shammai, very often we hear about the positives of their relationship, but we don't hear about the times where they struggled, because every relationship struggles, and Shammai and Hillel did as well. Any thoughts and comments or any of that, or anything you want to bring in from things that you know previously? Okay, then I'm going to continue with one other quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, where she said, another often asked question, and this really is, I think, something that we can bring both to this conversation and also internally to ourselves. Another oft asked question when I speak in public is, do you have some good advice that you might share with us? Yes, I do, she said. It comes from my savvy mother-in-law, advice she gave me on my wedding day. In every good marriage, she counseled, it helps to be a little deaf. I have followed that advice assiduously, and not only at home through 56 years of marital partnership, non-paral. I have employed it as well in every workplace, including the Supreme Court. When a thoughtless or unkind word is spoken, best tune it out. Reacting in anger or annoyance will not advance one's ability to persuade. The only way that Hillel and Shammai, after everything that they had been through, would be able to rebuild a relationship is by being a little deaf to the mistakes of the past, by enabling them to have a little more trust for what's going on in the future. So I think her message is a really powerful one to take to heart, of what are the times where we need to just tune out the insults and instead treat one another with respect and be able to just honor one another's perspectives. There was a little more I had on my sheet specifically around rebuke, but I actually think that I'm going to end here instead of going into that, because that is a teaching in its own right. And I think that this quote from Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is probably as good as any quote can ever be. So I just want to open it up if anyone has any thoughts or final things that they want to bring to the conversation.
You know, I think her quote that you brought up was simple and important, but I also find it remarkably complex. The complexity for me is really after the fact, that once you receive that gut punch, that unkind remark, that disdain from another person, you've heard it. And so the deafness comes after the fact. And I think that's a big order. I think Ruth Bader Ginsburg is someone we'd all like to emulate and practice and do as she did. But I think along the way, there are really tough moments. And I can only reflect on my own life experiences when that hurt has come about. And what do I do with it so I can get to that next Ruth Bader Ginsburg level?
It's a really, really good point. When someone throws insults or tries to hurt us or does something that really, really does hurt us, how do we move past it? I think that's a great question to contemplate today. And I mean, the other piece of it is we don't have to move past it on a timetable of the Jewish calendar, right? Here on this day, we're asked to forgive. We're asking for forgiveness, but there are things that we might not be ready to forgive. There are things that we might not be able to tune a deaf ear to because they hurt so much right now. And I just want to affirm that that's okay. We are human beings and it takes us time to work through things. But it is my hope that whatever hurt has been given to us, whatever wrongs have happened to us, that we will be able to work through those things to forgive, not for the sake of people who have hurt us, but for our own sakes. Because as long as we hold that, we really are hurting ourselves. There's a beautiful quote. Now I'm going to forget exactly what it is of really anger is, or holding on to these feelings is like drinking poison and then expecting someone else to be hurt by it. Whenever we're holding on to this, where it's us who are hurting. So I hope that we can move past it so that we don't need to hurt so much.
One thing I would like to say, I like the way she said a little bit deaf, because there does come a point when the abuses are repeated, and that was what she was also good about, is saying enough to the deafness. So it's a little bit deaf to cast off, to say, you know what, someone's having a bad day, they really didn't mean that. But if you know that their intent or who they are is not in a good place, then you have to decide how you're going to react to that. But to me, deafness is not the way to do it. You have to protect yourself in other ways.
That's a really, really good point, Renee, because there are times where there is immense abuse and fear and awful things involved. And it's one thing to forgive and move past something once we're in a safe place, but we have to make the decisions in order to get ourselves into a safe place. So that's really, really important.
I'd just like to come back to the initial comment, the initial quote of RBG about dissenting and the impact on the future, because I think that change of any kind, especially social justice change, takes a tremendous amount of time. And for those of us who work within the spheres of social justice as part of our professional lives and or our personal lives, it can get very, very frustrating. And I never really thought about the connection between dissenting and the impact on the future as opposed to the present moment, probably until these high holy days. And I think it will be easier for me to stick in my own moments of dissent and stay grounded in them, knowing that my saying no or my asking questions or my raising objection may not have an impact for years to come. And I've already seen that happen. And I think working in education wheels turn very slowly sometimes, but I think the wheels of social justice change turn even slower. They don't turn quickly, let us put it that way. And we as Jews have lived that, all of us, at some point or other, or our parents or grandparents. So I thank you for highlighting that and for also connecting it with our ancient texts. I really enjoyed that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I just hope that whenever we are in a moment of fear about the current right now, that we can remember the long term and that we can work towards creating a world that we wish to see in the future. Because we have been through difficult times before, we will be through difficult times in the future, but every incremental step can bring us a little bit closer to creating the world that we wish to see. So I thank you so much for joining in study and in conversation today, for all of your absolutely amazing insights. I am so humbled and grateful to be able to study Torah with every single one of you. And we are going to have a little bit of time before we come together at 3 o'clock. Not a lot of time, since we don't need time for meals and things like that. We're trying to make sure there's opportunities to keep everyone busy throughout the day. But at 3 o'clock, we'll have an opportunity to either do meditation with Pam Tarlow. If you need the link, please stay on. We'll make sure that you have it. There it is. Thank you, Cantor. So there's the link right there. It'll be starting at 3 p.m. It's also in your email if you need it. And of course, you can reach out if you don't have it. Yeah, Howard, do you have a question about that? You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? We can't hear you. Hopefully we can figure it out right after this, because we definitely want to take care of whatever you need. But the other option at 3 p.m. is to come right back here at the same link where we're going to be doing a healing service. And so we hope that you can take advantage of either of these things. And at 4 o'clock, and then we'll have a break after our 3 o'clock, and we'll come together for a Yizkor service at 5 on the dot. And then at 6, we'll begin Neela, our final service. So thank you all so much.
Rabbi, I've just been informed that I put the wrong link in there, so I just want to change that very quickly.
Oops.
Maybe Carrie, could you share that link with everyone that you just shared with me?
Of course, I'll send it right now.
Just throw
Thank
it
you
in the chat for everybody.
Oh, Howard, you're unmuted. What were you saying?
Just real quick on just a follow-up point on the conversation. In the many years of social justice and all the conflict that comes with it, I found that you develop a skill in managing the conflicting views, yours, theirs, and it's not like everybody agrees. It's just that with the group you're working with, you somehow learn to keep moving forward and keep above the fray. And that's a skill that comes from all that interaction. And it gets bumpy, it gets rough. I somehow found it fun, even though it raised my blood pressure.
But I think that's a skill that all of us can benefit from. So I hope this is a year where we all have chances to gain it. Thank you so much, Howard, for that. I also want to thank Tom Rosenberg for being our greeter throughout this opportunity. And yeah, the link is now in the chat. Thank you so much, Carrie, for doing that. And I look forward to seeing everyone later on.
Yeah, mute me again, Rabbi.
The healing service is the same as here. Yeah. But we have a little bit of time, a half an hour before that begins.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for learning with us and for spending this time.
This has been the greatest Yom Kippur service I've ever been in.
Thank you, Howard.
We've never had a congregation discussion like this that I can think of in roughly 23 years of involvement there. I just loved every second